Now the gear placement on an electric glider is pretty critical because we don't want to end up with tail weight. We always don't want a really nose heavy glider either. We want to be able to use the battery pack to basically change the CG, but we can also change the wing loading and our flight duration as well by changing out battery packs. So I want to be able to use the widest variety of packs possible, from a 2453S pack like this, which is pretty big, weighs about 4 ounces, to a smaller, like a graphene pack here. This is an 854S, and that would be a really nice pack for this airplane, or something as small as this little 4S 650 pack. And I want to be able to utilize all those, again, to change wing loading, and also be able to adjust the CG slightly for different wind conditions by just moving the battery pack back and forth in the fuselage. So here's my basic layout. We're obviously stuck with a motor in the nose here. I've got the ESC already soldered and connected to the motor right behind that. It's going to live on the floor. The next thing we need to do is add the elevator and rudder servos. And I have a tray roughed up here. This is kind of not a final design, but I think the servos are going to live right up front here, right behind the motor. And that'll give us some room for our receiver to live right above the ESC here. And that gives us plenty of room to be able to slide in a bigger battery pack like this 3S 2450 and be able to slide it in and get it into the fuselage here, a little closer to the CG and center of effort on the airplane, which would be nice. So the battery's not going to ride up in the nose where that's a lot of inertia weight. So I want to be able to get that battery pack back. And obviously this graphene pack is going to fit really easily in there. And this might be the pack that I choose to fly this airplane with. So that'll slide right in there. But we're going to go ahead and throw the glider on the CG machine in here and see where our CG is really going to end up. Now I have the Orion set up on an electronic CG balance machine. Now initially I thought these machines were kind of gimmicky, but it's actually become one of the most useful tools in my shop. And this is the one from glidercg.com. It's super simple, it's 3D printed. They are a little bit, pricey, but I use this all the time, and they're especially useful for setting CGs before doing your initial construction. So you can get a good idea where your gear is going to end up and where the balance point is going to be as you build, so you don't have any surprises at the end. So I have all the gear in the nose, everything but the battery pack set up. You can see I have the servos actually, taped to the wing. Though they're pretty close to CG, so they wouldn't really make a big difference. So right now my CG machine is giving me a weight of 1,158 grams without the battery pack, and it's telling me the CG is at 115.6 back from the leading edge. Now I have 2 tape marks here. The bigger one is 103, and that's the most apt recommended CG for this plane. But all my Explorers fly about the 50% chord on the wing planform, and this planform is very similar to my other Explorers. So I'm expecting the CG to be probably more like 115-ish at 50% chord of this particular wing. So let's go ahead and put the battery pack on and see where my 103, how far forward the battery pack is going to be to get to my 103. So let's just put it like right over my 103 mark. So it says the CG is at 113, which is back. It's closer to that aft line. So let's just slide the battery pack forward. This is where the CG machine is super useful. It's so much easier to use the electronic one to do these fine measurements here. So there's 108, there's 105, there's 104, so there's 103.5. So that's pretty close to that recommended aft CG limit. And that's where the battery pack is going to end up in the fuselage. So just slide it in, slide it back so the front edge of the battery is pretty close to the leading edge. And there's my 103.5-ish CG. But if I want to fly more like 113, I can just keep sliding this back and I can get a much more. There's 113 right there. And I'm guessing that's probably we're going to be pretty close to a good neutral CG. But the battery's easy to reach back there. The connector's right here at the opening of the canopy, and the ESC will easily be able to reach it. So one of the big challenges of putting together an electric sailplane fuselage is we have a lot of extra gear to worry about. Plus, we have CG issues. We want to be able to get the CG within a good range of this sailplane so it's not too tail heavy or too nose heavy, where we can be able to use the battery pack to adjust not only the wing loading, but perhaps the CG position as well. So this plane being a little bit smaller than most, the fuse is probably the size of an F5J fuse, but we still have the motor, 2 servos, an ESC, a battery, receiver, and everything else to cram in to the fuselage and get the CG within pretty good range, so I don't have to add any nose weight and hopefully not any tail weight. So let me show you my solutions to rigging out the Orion 2. The servos kind of had to be up front here for CG issues. Now initially I was going to mount the servos vertically. You see an early part of this video where I had them mocked up in a tray vertically, but I just couldn't get the clearances to work, and because they were sticking up and striking the canopy, and it almost worked, but just not really. So I checked out some other guys' builds, and they were just laying the servos on their side like this, so that's what I did. Also, I needed to be able to remove the servos because I may be testing some different motors and ESCs with this power setup. So I basically designed a tray that lifts out. There's 2 screws. I put 2 rails in, and then it's just basically a carbon sandwich tray, and then the servos are glued to that. Now I should have gotten the side lug versions of the 6100s, which I think is the 6110s, which have side lugs, but I wasn't able to get those quickly enough. So I just went old school, wrapped them in Kapton tape, sanded the bottoms, sanded the tray, and glued them in with the E6000 adhesive, clear adhesive, which grips really well to the Kapton tape and the carbon. So these aren't coming out, but if I need to take the servos off, I can just cut the Kapton tape and pop the servos out. Now I did use the Thomas Louis Studios. He sent me some nice aluminum servo arms. So this is the rudder servo here, and the arm's a little taller because I want to get max rudder throw for aerobatic stuff. But you can see it's not too tall and has just enough clearance so it clears the canopy and also clears the servo behind it. This is the elevator servo, and I have quite a bit shorter of a horn. I took the red aluminum ones and cut the top off, so it's almost like a DLG setup, so I have a lot of resolution. Still have plenty of throw because this plane actually has a pretty generous elevator in the back, but just the horns are really short, so I get really, I can really maximize the resolution and feel on the elevator. So behind the ESC I have the receiver in. This is an AR, it's a 9310 carbon receiver with the extended antennas. This satellite actually runs all the way back to the trailing edge of the wing where I have another antenna back there. So I have pretty good antenna separation, and it gets the satellite receiver out of the way. So the receiver comes right out, and then I can put in bigger battery packs. Like right now I've got a 2450 pack crammed in, but it's pretty far back in the fuselage. It's almost underneath the wing joiner. So that's where it is. And then the plane CGs. Right now it's CGing at about 103 for CG. So that's about the layout. Definitely took quite a bit of engineering to figure all this out and to get everything to fit correctly, but it was worth the extra time. I can now take out the servos, and everything's adjustable. I did use adjustable links on the push rods here, even though I have everything zeroed out on the radio and everything's using definitely minimal amounts of sub trim. Having the adjustable links is really nice, at least for the rudder and the elevator.